Good day and welcome to Consult Dr. Anderson, our monthly webinar. So this is for November, and this is natural medicines for chronic infectious cases. And if you've been keeping track, we did prescription medicines for chronic infections, I believe 2 months ago, and then we did last month eclectic and low-dose herb prescribing kind of across the spectrum. And this is the third in that series. Really, it's not really a series, but we're kind of keeping to a theme. And one of the reasons for this existing is it needs to exist, but also another reason is when we had the discussions around the prescription drugs for chronic infections, there were a lot of questions about, integrating natural medicines or people who might be in locations where natural medicines are the only thing that they can use, or the other time it's very common, even, where I practice, where we can use prescription drugs or natural medicine, is in the instance where somebody's just, they're kind of burned out on drugs. They've been on them a long time, and we're looking for alternatives. So rather than try and mix and match with natural stuff and drugs in the first one, decided to make this its own thing. Now, one thing I'll bring up in just kind of context, if you haven't seen it, is the fact that the middle of these three was about the use of eclectic prescribing of herbs, which includes a lot of what we would nowadays call low dose or toxic botanicals, etc. But one of the reasons I did that as its own standalone is that's a way to use herbs across a very broad spectrum of indications, but some of them do relate to certainly acute infections and some chronic things. And so later in this presentation, we'll wind around back to there, but I want you to know there's a whole webinar on that for context. So that's the deal there. So we'll kind of go through these introductory things and talk about the order as we go along. So the next webinar is, if you're listening live, is on December 17, 2019, and it's Tuesday, 5:30 to 7, or as we did in this case, 5:30 to 7:30. So this particular webinar you're listening to right now is 2 CE credits, of which all 2 credits are pharmacology through AANP, and we'll have that all for you at the end in the certificate. This is our 60th webinar, keeping track in this way. We actually have a couple of other ones that aren't really on here, so we're above 60, but there are many available. So why talk about natural products and infections? The big reason, this comes right from the CDC, there are people literally dying because of treatment-resistant infections, and this is a huge problem. It's been a problem for a long, long time, but it's just getting worse all the time. And as you'll see when we go through here, this phenomenon, and it's not always mentioned, but it usually is, has driven a lot of new and newer research in the area of using natural medicines in infections, because the pharmacologists realize that we have all of these drug-resistant bugs now, and maybe going to something that they haven't seen or that might have a more elegant mechanism of action might be a way to deal with that. And indeed, it actually is. So this is a big, big problem. People don't realize 35,000 deaths a year simply from antibiotic resistance. That's pretty huge. What I want to start with, and then we're going to move into some specific things, etc., are to go through some of the research publications in this area that most of these, with one exception, are very recent publications. And this is not that you maybe haven't seen them, but just to kind of talk about them from the top down. Also, I put these in because all of them are available as free, open access, full text online. And some of them are, really useful from like a hit the ground running point of view as far as, this type of natural agent does that, and we can use it in this case. But a lot of them are coming from this point of view of what do we do with resistant infections, or infections that we really don't have any drugs to treat, or we don't have good drugs to treat, like certain viruses, etc. And what does nature offer us? And so a lot of these are actually quite involved from the point of view of both the chemical constituents and also the mechanisms of actions of these things. And so one of the things I'd like to say in preparation for looking at these particular studies is, when it comes to the ones that are a little heavier in the mechanism and or maybe use some herbs or plants or substances that you've never heard of, what you can do if you truly don't have that plant extract or that plant or whatever available to you, you can look at, and that happens. So some of them maybe in Chinese formulas that you can get in North America or wherever you're at. Some you may not be able to get very easily. But what you can do, if you can't actually find the plant that's being researched, you can look at what mechanisms that they show it works via, and then you can reverse search. So you can put the mechanism in a search and then say, mechanism, and then, botanical or herb or mushroom or, whatever you think is going to match. And sometimes you have to go through a few of those. And often you can then, through doing a reverse search of the mechanism, find, gee, there's this one paper that was written on an herb I actually have access to that does exactly the same thing. Or in the case of some of the mushrooms, sometimes there's mushrooms studied that might be very available in some countries but not in others. So that's another thing that happens as well. So just remember that even if you see an arcane or hard to get or impossible to get, plant here, there are ways to search for it, which is very important. So again, I'm showing these from top down, and we can discuss them a little bit, and they're mostly for overview. But really what they are is just to make you aware of a lot of the modern research going on and give you access to papers that have some pretty good coverage around the idea of herb and the botanical type medicines and infections. So this is certainly one of those papers. It's not brand new, 2004, but I did want to just start by saying, something we're not going to talk about tonight or today, whenever you're listening, in this particular recording, but that we must say out loud because it's super important, is the more that we get people to eat in a way that supports their immune function, the less sick they get. So it's important for people to know that is a critical part of prevention and staying well. This is a really nice publication about it, and it's really a good way to kind of summarize foodstuffs and immunity, etc. So if you want a resource, you probably have many resources on that. The other thing I'll say, though, which is a little bit in this paper, but also just traditionally, most of us who use botanical medicine or whatever understand that, we have a lot of things that we might cook with and we might use in food making that can be medicinal. So we're not going to get into that, like recipes and other stuff of that nature. But one of the things, a lot of people will make particular types of broths or decoctions of kitchen herbs to help out with certain things. So most of us have a recipe, for example, for a garlic-based either drink or something to eat or whatever. And of course, garlic is very, very anti-infective. We're going to look at garlic supplements later, but garlic itself can be very, very useful. As a matter of fact, this morning when I woke up, because I've come off a bunch of speaking, I had a real sore, dry throat, and there's a lot of that going around. I didn't want it to go anywhere. So, I made basically a decoction with some thyme and some rosemary, some aromatic herbs, and then essentially crushed up some garlic cloves and heated them to the point where it had all of the goodness of the garlic, and it was pretty spicy, but it didn't destroy the allicin that are in the garlic. So I drank that down, and 6 hours later had no throat problems at all and felt much better. So I just want to say this presentation isn't about those dietary things or really too much about prevention, but it's super important, and I don't want to make us think that we can forget about those things while we dive into the deeper therapeutic end of things. Now, this is a interesting paper from 2017, so pretty recent, and looking at antibacterial activity of 9 different plant species with activity against E. coli and a bunch of other bacteria. And one of the things that they come up with in this particular paper, which I think is important, is E. coli is something that is easy to use in the lab. It's easy to grow in the lab, and it can be a very good target for at least basic research looking into, does this kill that? And they get into the chemistry and all of that. And if you if you're around a long time ago, before the enterohemorrhagic 015787 E. coli became known, and we had some deaths and all of that from it. It was very common in microbiology labs. We would use E. coli for almost everything. And of course, we were not using enterohemorrhagic E. coli. There's lots and lots of strains of E. coli, but it was very easy to grow, and it was easy to test things on. And not because of science, but because of fear of the name E. coli, actually, back in those days, which I think was in the early 90s or late 80s or something like that. We actually had to start using other microbes, and I think the pendulum has swung back now. But anyway, E. coli, and there's a few other bad bugs in here that they checked against things. So you can look at that particular paper, open access online. You got the DOI up there, or you can just put in the name and BMC, complementary alternative medicine, and the page number, and you probably get it too. But this is a good one to take a look at, and so you can look at, okay, so this paper is looking at bacterial species and looking at extracts from plant species. And again, there's going to be some stuff in this paper you're going to be pretty familiar with. Be other things that you may have to look and either search, does that component come in an herb I can get and I know of, or is it something where I have to research the mechanism? Now, I wanted to point this out. This is a 2015 paper, so not terribly old either. We don't often think about these potentially blinding things like chlamydia trachomatis as something we would want to use in natural medicine for, et cetera. And so you almost don't think sometimes that there's going to be anyone's going to have studied it, right? I mean, it seems crazy, but this is a particular paper, again, not from this country, but they're looking at, well, what can we do with molecules that come from nature that may actually help to treat trachoma and chlamydia trachomatis. The important part about this, I think, for us is not maybe so much treating trachoma, which is potentially blinding, sequelae of chlamydia trachomatis. That's how it got its name. But the idea that natural products have been studied for the chlamydial genus, and this paper can give you some insights into natural products that might be synergistic to put in formulas if you have your patients with other species, Chlamydia psittaci or Chlamydia pneumoniae. Say they've got myco and Chlamydia pneumoniae together. What natural stuff can I target that with? Now, mycoplasma, we have a little section coming up down below these slides just on mycoplasmas, but it is kind of nice to know that there's a few things out, not a ton of research around chlamydial species, but this one has some really good gems in it as well. Now this is one looking at Borrelia burgdorferi, so our friend from the world of Lyme, and this is one of those pre-publications. So they published it, but because it was going to be open access, they put it out in this particular pre-pub format. So you can probably now get the pretty paper, but this one you can get full access. And so it's looking at natural medicines, for the two forms of Borrelia. And the nice thing about this paper is it's very new, May of 2019, so it's probably the good version came out after that. But it was done by a pretty heavy-hitting group from Johns Hopkins and Focus Naturopathic and California Center for Functional Medicine, et cetera. So really interesting group, and you can maybe see Jacob Leone there, number 2. And if you ever went to AAMP in Portland when we did our chronic infectious disease, Jacob was one of the speakers, and one of the things I had him speak about were herbal interventions for the Lyme family. So this is a really nice kind of full circle thing here. Now there's, of course, pages and pages and pages, but one of the things I want to point out here is a nice part of this paper, if you take a look at the whole thing, is they looked at the activity of the herbs, which is great, and they also looked at the activity in the non-cystic and cystic forms, or active, inactive forms, and so there's a little bit of difference there. But a nice thing is that some of the things that we see and use came, of course, they were going to test them because they're things that we use a lot. And if you look through this paper, especially if you are, we're all at some point treating a Lyme patient, whether we know it or not, but Lyme is a complex. And so Lyme as a complex, there's Borrelia and there's co-infections, but then there's also associated infections. So they might have Epstein-Barr, they might have an HHV6 or some other thing like that, or they may have mycoplasma or something that's not technically a co-infection, but it's associated infection. So the more things you can hit with the same herbal products and the more you can rotate them, the better. And this paper is an extremely good little window into that. And if you did go to AAMP in Portland a year ago in 2018 when Jacob did his presentations, you have access to those. There's just some real gems in there that incorporate this, but this paper actually is faster than his slides, because I don't know if you were, he had these big slide sets and like 600 references and stuff. So this paper is kind of a faster way to get to that information. Then we get down to things like mushrooms. Now, this is the one paper that's not a modern paper, 1997. So it's not that old, but it's not modern. And the only reason I bring this up is that this is one of those review papers looking at virus and mushrooms. And it looks at a category of mushrooms that it's one of the parent categories of mushrooms. So the parent category then is looked at for what is it inside of these mushrooms that has viral effect, antiviral activity. And so this paper you don't really, unless you like mushrooms and want to read all about them, this is not a paper that you really probably need to dive into or even get, but it sort of sets up why is this family of mushrooms important. And what it's really setting up is this particular paper from 2018, so fairly recent. And as I say here, this is a heinously in-depth paper about mushrooms and immunology. So the next 4 slides all come from this paper, just to give them credit. And I'm not really going to go through and teach from these slides, but if you want to dig in and look at antiviral fungology and mechanisms and things that get just really, really deep, this in my opinion, is the paper to start with because it's recent, it gets right at it, and it goes deeper than many, many other papers do. Now, this is one where you probably are going to see mushroom categories that you use or can get or whatever, but you might also see categories of mushrooms that are, potentially you've never heard of or whatever. So what you can start with is just look up the constituent, and then you'll be able to search for mushrooms, that medicinal mushrooms you have, but also mechanisms. This one gets way, way into mechanisms. So this is one of the family to genus things, talking about, okay, what from the family, the mushroom family, what subcategories have the best antiviral agents, and they're marked there over on the right-hand side. And then this gets like deeper and deeper and deeper into which ones do what and why and how. Now, this is an example of what comes in this paper, and certainly it's not on a slide so that we would want to read it together because it's kind of small writing and all that stuff. But the point of it is, this is a free open access paper, and if you really want to get into the compounds, and so there's acronyms here, they tell you all what the acronyms are, etc. But if you want to get into the compounds and the known species of mushrooms, they have these. Okay, very, very important, and it can help you again with reverse searching too for the compound itself that's antiviral. Now, we know that mushrooms have many, many potential positives. We use them not only in antiviral, treatment when the virus is going on. We use them as immune modulators. We use them in cancer. They're even effective in other infectious situations. One of the things that I find mushrooms wonderful for, because they have immunomodulatory activity as well as antiviral and antimicrobial activity, is if we have somebody that we're cycling, whether it's drugs or heavy-duty herbs or some combo or whatever, and they get to a point where they need a break. Their body needs a break. You're trying to rebuild their adrenals and mitochondria and stuff, and their infectious state is not maybe all gone and better, but it's at a lower ebb, and so they can take a break. What you don't want to do is to kind of let them just take a break with nothing immunologic going into them, but you maybe don't want them taking 3 tinctures and 8 pills or whatever every day. So it's kind of important both ways. I like mushrooms in this setting of taking a break, and we'll often give people, our treatment cycles, once we kind of, with a chronic infectious patient, our treatment cycles usually are 9 or 12 weeks long. Now, in the beginning, we may adjust it, say 6 weeks to, raise or lower the intensity or something, but generally treatment cycles are 9 to 12 weeks. So we might give them 9 to 12 weeks on a break and just have them on some good background mushrooms and then be working on the other stuff. Now, yes, you're always going to work on their nutrient status and their adrenals, their mitochondria and stuff like that, and their gut. You're doing that as you go along, but you might need a couple of months to really focus on those things without as much going in. Mushrooms are wonderful at keeping the lid on the infectious background. Another thing I really like is, and this is the life cycle of particular types of virus, etc., because the paper is largely about viri. But one of the things that I think is important to consider is the paper does a great job of it describing the virology, mycology combo and mechanistically how it does it. But the other thing from this is, in addition to its work with viruses, the mushroom families, as I said, we use them in cancer and we use them for and all kind of other stuff. The paper gets into how does it do that, and as you know, there's a lot of homology between viral problems and cancer and immune dysregulation, sort of a big old soup of problems. And so the paper gets into the mechanisms. Of course, the paper is focused on virus, which is great, but it kind of gives you that bigger macro look if you really want to get updated on that. And so I was really pleased at the depth they went into around virology. And this is just one, and just as an example, not that we need to read it, but this is an example of, they have these big tables, and what they go through are research review. So on the right side, it says references. Then this is the phylum of mushroom and the source or the fungal order of the mushroom, and then what is it in there that created the benefit. So this might be something where if you don't see the mushroom, that you can get a hold of in the second category, the fungal order category, you might look at the compound in the left side and say, well, what other mushrooms have? Many mushrooms share these things. So you're going to see some mushrooms that are kind of common, some mushrooms that maybe aren't common, at least in North America, and you may be able to find a mushroom that you have available to you that has something in the left-hand column. So again, very, very useful paper. And because they did this massive research review, another, as you know, big benefit of that is you don't have to go and read 3,000 other papers to get this data and information. So I just think it's really important. It's very, very important because mushrooms have good primary treating ability. They have good, as I say, kind of keeping the lid on the inflammasome and the immunome when you're taking a little break from killing stuff. And they have a lot of other, immunological benefits. So I just find them very, very useful. Now I'm actually showing pictures here of a few things that I use. I don't have any affiliation. I make no money from these. In fact, when I buy them, I have to pay for them. So this is just to let you know, because I do get asked a lot, like offline, well, what do you actually use? And there's some different ones here. Now, I'll start in the middle. That particular company, the host defense company, the reason that I started using a lot of that was because that was the type of mushroom that we used in the NIH cancer research, and this is one of their many types. So my community is literally a bunch of 17 species. We used their turkey tail a lot in the turkey tail interventions, and we used others of the mushrooms. So this is just an example of a company. So that's one that we used to use quite a bit. I put a combo product, Super BioVeg, on the right. So if you've used BioVegetarian, that is a vitamin, mineral, herbal combo for immune problems. Usually it's used for acute immune problems. Super BioVeg is the one that adds mushrooms. So it's basically a similar base formula with mushrooms added. And this is more of, in my mind, it's more of either an acute kind of hit them hard on the front end product. So they're doing like 2 with each meal, or it's maybe something where they're taking a low dose over time just to get a real broad smattering. So as opposed to, say, the My Community where it's just mushrooms, Super BioVeg has all sorts of cofactors and other stuff in it. The one thing I will say is, so like the host defense ones are usually capsules. Super BioVeg is a very large tablet, and the large tablets can be a bit hard to swallow. So I usually, like when I take Super BioVeg, I take it while I'm eating, because then there's food to kind of push it down, and if you let it sit on your tongue, you actually you'll taste some of the herbs in it, and they're not all super tasty, but it's a wonderful mixture. The mushroom extract that I use the most across the board right now is on the left side, and that is the AHCC Empower extended release. And excuse me, just a little bit of water. So the AHCC is studied very, very well. I use Empower as the vehicle for AHCC, partly because it's the extended release form, but also it's a real potent one. And I've tested this during acutes on people and myself, and I know I get much more of an immune response from the Empower version because of concentration. And I'm a pretty resistant, like I have to take large amounts of herbal products and drugs, for them to work. So I'm kind of a good test case. But if I'm been exposed to stuff or I feel like I'm getting something, if I take something in the early phase of, being exposed or getting, virus or bacteria or God knows what, if I take it or if I do it like an IV or whatever and I get a big cytokine response, I know that's a good product because not everything does that for me. And I have been super impressed in the acute phase with Empower. But we use Empower a lot on the in chronic phases as well. Now we use it in cancer too and stuff. But Empower is something because if you get the extended release, you can do twice a day dosing. And so on let's say they're taking 9 weeks to just do a little immune stuff, and we're going to rebuild, we're going to work heavy on their gut and their mitochondria and stuff, but we don't want them taking a ton of other killing stuff. I'll put them on Empower and do 1 or 2 twice a day during those, say, 9 or 12 weeks that we're doing the rebuild stuff. And it keeps their immune system on task. It keeps them from, having a flare-up, et cetera. And so that's one of the ones that I probably use the most. Now, one question that comes up quite commonly, actually, and we deal with it a little bit later, I think, in another slide, but I'll just kind of say it out loud here. There's a lot of information from the past with respect to mushrooms and medicine that would say, well, they have to be extracted in this particular way or they don't work. And then as time has gone on, and one of the reasons that I put some of those newer papers in there, and there's actually some in the coming slides I'll reference to as well, is that the way that the mushroom is processed does make a difference, but our knowledge of processing mushrooms and how to process them and all that stuff, it has expanded over time. And so one of the things that we have to be a little careful with is there's some references that come from, say, 10 years ago or more that say, it can only be this type of extraction to get the product out the right way. Now that may or may not be true, but it was true then because that was the state of the art of the science and the extraction technology. So beyond anything I say, and again, I have no financial affiliation with these three. I use other stuff too. It's just these are the ones that I've used a lot of, and I find very, very useful in modern times. The one on the left and right, I use a lot for, the infectious folks. But the I would say is do your due diligence, know the company, know how they extract it, and every reputable company I know of has a logical reason for the way that they process their mushroom product. If you read, and generally it's written in a document or something, but if you read that and it makes sense, etc., and you vetted the company and you know the company, and like I say in my case, I test them out a lot of times on me. And if you get good response, you can kind of go with that, even if it doesn't quite match, like, well, it was grown the wrong way or it was extracted the wrong way. If you get response, you get response. And the reason I say that is our understanding of how to do this with mushrooms has evolved greatly. One of the other things, which is sort of the same as some of the laboratory business that we get into with controversy, is you'll get people who, will throw shade on other companies, which, that's the way of commerce, I guess, But they'll say, well, those people can't make mushrooms at work because they do it wrong, and we're the only people who know how to do it right. What I'm saying is they may or may not be right. Take all of that proprietary stuff with a grain of salt. Do your own due diligence. Ask your colleagues. And because there's been this evolution in extraction methods, growth methods, what's safe, what's safer, what's less safe, etc., know that information that's very dogmatic and says you can only do it this way, not that way, might be a bit outdated, and you really want to look into it. Now, if it's a company you don't know and you have no idea whether they're doing things right or not, then be very, very careful. But if it's a company that you've looked at their diligence and you've used it and you're getting results, regardless of what the other companies say, it's probably got something going for it. So that's a little bit of editorializing, but I think it's really important because those are questions that come up very, very commonly. Okay, so Christina asks, how long do you dose chronic patients before you cycle? Normally with chronically ill folks, 9 or 12 weeks per intervention. Now, here's the thing. If there's like, it's real bad and they've got one of every kind of, one of every type of infection, etc., there may be, if I'm mixing drugs and natural stuff or just heavy doses of natural stuff, 12 weeks can feel like a long time, and sometimes you start to kill stuff off a little bit quicker on the front end. So I might do 6 weeks, do a check-in, and then do another 6 weeks, maybe adjusting. But after that, if we're gaining some traction, I'm usually lowering the number of things I'm giving them. And if they truly, now this would not be true, Christina, for somebody who's like, you're totally complex Lyme person or somebody with a bunch of viruses that you're really having to bang on. But let's say you do cycles, and the cycles are 9 or 12 weeks. In my experience, I wouldn't go shorter than that, except maybe that first time where we do 2 6s to just check in. But sometimes you get to a place where they're really feeling a lot better, and then you start to back up and you're going to work on their other problems like their mitochondria and their gut and all that stuff. That's the time where I really find, mushrooms are good to kind of keep a lid on the other problems. And so I would still do 9 to 12 weeks because it usually takes that long to work on their endocrine system and their other stuff. And the mushrooms really do a great job in the background. So I normally get people used to 9 to 12 week cycles. And then the other part of it is if I'm cycling for the purposes either of giving a break from drugs or for the purposes of decreasing resistance, then it's that's about the amount of time, 9 to 12 weeks. So, all right. Well, we got excited with mushrooms. That's good. Mushrooms are great. All right. I'm going to close this. Move forward. So this one is, again, from 2015, so not that long ago, looking at plant preparations. It says as a remedial approach for viral diseases. So it's sort of like, well, let's, go back to the future. This one you can get full text online. I think everything I'm showing you can get it free online. But one of the nice things about this paper is they look, of course, this comes from an Indian writing group, and so they have access to maybe some herbs that you don't, et cetera. But just like I said in the beginning, if you look at the immunology and mechanisms of actions, even if it's a herb or a plant you can't get, you can reverse search and say, well, this is the mechanism that we believe is working, and it seems to match the type of infections I want to work on. I've never heard of that herb. You can reverse search the mechanism and then back into herbs that you do have availability of. So that is an easy way, or semi-easy way to do it. Now this I put in here. This is actually a mixture that they made into a proprietary blend, and I'm not so much putting it in because I think the proprietary blend is great. They published this in 2018 in Noviron, also known as Gene Eden Veer, but it's a natural product combo that actually had some help with the herpes viruses, and because we're always trying to bang on herpes viruses, and you either may not have the acyclovir family, you might not want to use it, or maybe they've just been using it forever and they're really not getting anywhere. It's nice to have other things to think about. And so the people who made it, again, I have no connection to these people at all. I just had to, this is their material, so I had to call it out. And yeah, it's some proprietary mixture, but interestingly, they use quercetin, glycyrrhiza, green tea, cinnamon, and selenium. Now, you see there's a lot of selenium in a lot of the other studies that were done later on when we get to them, but it's an interesting mixture. It's a very if you look at it from a Chinese medicine point of view, it's an interesting balance to the formula. It's got cinnamon, which in this country we don't think of that much, or we think of it for blood sugar or something like that. But one of the things, and all this stuff is in the respiratory webinar that we did a while back, but things, aromatics like cinnamon and other stuff, actually have a fair amount of anti-infective capacity, and cinnamon absorbs reasonably well. So it's just an interesting thing that they, if you look at the study, of course it was safe, which is always nice, but they looked at people with the HPV and HHV families, so herpes simplex, Epstein-Barr, etc. And they even looked at things such as Hep C and cytomegalovirus, so that's kind of interesting. Now this one, if you put that DOI in, you can get the whole chapter for free. I don't know if you really want to read the chapter, but it's a pretty interesting chapter. And it's basically getting into looking at the mitochondria during viral infections. And so, of course, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff in there where the mitochondria are shifted around during viral infections because the virus is hijacking the cell. So this is why I always say, tumor biology and viral antiviral biology are very similar because they often wind up having a lot of crossover. Another thing that I find interesting is many people, myself included, have always made these connections between viral infections and later neurodegenerative or other degenerative conditions because of the viral ability to go in and alter the cell. And they're not necessarily making that connection directly because that's not the point that they're trying to make with the chapter. But if you look at it mechanistically, it sort of fits that, like, the less virus we allow in to shift the mitochondria and the cells around, et cetera, and hijack them, the less other problems we're going to have, whether it's later cancers or later inflammatory disease, et cetera. And then they go down, and I underlined all of it. You can read yourself. You can, like I say, get this whole chapter if you're into this sort of thing. But the one of the reasons that viruses become virulent and problematic is they actually go in. They don't just hijack our DNA and nuclear material; they hijack the mitochondria, and they don't just hijack it; they shift it all around so that they can be viruses and replicate, and that has a spillover immunologically, which is very important. I just put this in because we're going to talk about resistant fungus coming up. And there's one, and so just hold this in your mind for a moment. There's one strain of Candida that's become drug resistant, and one of the drug resistant gambits that the Candida has is to block the triazoles like fluconazole and itraconazole and all that. And it turns out that NSAIDs, especially like ibuprofen, block the drug-resistant pathway to some degree. So it's not that that's the answer to drug resistance, but it's a piece of the puzzle, and it's actually been studied. I just want to point it out here. I love this paper. It came out just this year. May 2019. And it's American Civil War plant medicines inhibit growth, biofilm formation, and quorum sensing by multi-drug resistant bacteria. And so what they really are looking at here, and so you've got a little lift out of the abstract there. This is a really cool paper. Is we're having more and more and more drug resistance. Now this comes from Nature, so this is like this is a pretty big publication to get into this stuff. And so Nature puts this out, and it basically says we've got drug resistance. Not everyone died during the Civil War who got infections. They had really horrible, surgical procedures. They had horrible all this other stuff. What kind of medicines were they using back then? And the really cool part about this is that they looked at, some nasty things, Klebsiella, Acinetobacter, Staph, and all this other stuff. And what they came down to was that some of the tree medicines that were used, and you'll see the trees here coming up, but some of the tree medicines that were used, some of which we still use, but we think of maybe in different ways, actually were working in mechanisms that decrease. So quorum sensing is one of the things that makes biofilms grow faster, and it also makes the MDR pumps stronger. So what they found was just incidentally from traditional herbal medicine, we have these tree-based medicines that block all of these nasty pathways that we're having trouble finding drugs to block. So maybe we should be looking into the things that worked before. Now, I guarantee you that this is leading people to try and develop drugs from the trees, but we've already done that, and it's just a really cool paper that way. I guess I don't have a second slide here, but here's the thing. The one, if you look down in the middle, the antiseptic trees, there's the first one, and then Aurelia, and then one we know a little bit more, Quercus alba, white willow. And so we think of white willow for pain and all sorts of other stuff. But something to consider, because I know, I've used a lot of Quercus. The other two were not familiar to me. But the Quercus alba, I used to use that a lot as a tincture, and we would use it during acute and flared infections in tincture mixtures. And we always would assume, because what it's famous for is an anodyne, we would assume it was being an anodyne. But it turns out that it and its family here, if you can find them at Quercus, you can. It turns out that it's not just an anodyne. It actually has these super important anti-biofilm and quorum sensing shifting changes that it can make, which there's almost, really, aside from biofilm drugs and stuff that we talk about in other places, there's not a lot of natural stuff that does all of this at once. So consider Quercus again if you've lost track of it. Nigella, Sue. I've started to call this is the new curcumin. Okay, this is black seed, black cumin, or it goes under a few different names. But the interesting thing is that the more you look at Nigella, the more you see that it kills weird bugs, anaerobic bacteria. It can kill the odd clostridial species that are associated with high amounts of different types of organic acids people get, and all of that stuff. And it's certainly it's a plant medicine, been around a long time, but it's been like its entry into scientific study has just burgeoned in the last 10, 12 years. And we first started to see it listed along the lines of a biofilm agent and along the lines of getting after these anaerobic bacteria that are really hard to kill and all this other stuff. But the other thing that it does, which is very curcumin-like, is Nigella also, I don't know if you've seen, there's uses of Nigella in thyroid autoimmunity and all kinds of other stuff. Nigella also, like curcumin and like wormwood, has post-translational translational effect on the immunome, so on the Th system, etc. So it does its anti-infective work, and then it moves on to the immunome. So I think it's just really cool. I do need to disclose I was paid to formulate this as an OTC thing. Now, this is the OTC bismuth thiol, so this is a phase 2 biofilm thing. But the reason I put the Nigella in there was twofold. One is, on its own, it's a very strong anti-infective agent, but also it has data that shows on its own it's sort of in the middle of phase 1 and phase 2 biofilm effect. Couldn't put black cumin into the prescription version, so some of you know I have the prescription version, which, by the way, I've never been paid a dime for. I gave to the drug world just free, so that one, nothing. I don't get anything for that. I got paid to formulate this as an OTC, but the reason I put black cumin in here is because it's a supplement and it's protected. And what we found over time is this formula is kind of nice because it's got the phase 2 biofilm, and it's beating down or killing anaerobes and a whole bunch of other, if you look at Nigella, it kills a lot of other stuff. So it's a nice thing to have in there. All right, so very quickly, some acute dosing concepts, and then we're going to move into some nasty specific infections. So if you really want to look at the broader picture, the November webinar where we went into eclectic herbs and other stuff really got into this. But here's the thing that I'd like you to remember if you already don't know this, and that is you have to marinate an acutely ill person. So whether they are a healthy person who comes in your office and you're going to give them a botanical formula or something else, and they're acutely ill, they're febrile, etc., you really have to give them high doses. If they have been calm and they're a chronically infected patient and they have flared up because someone at the office brought them the latest crud or whatever, and you're going to do an acute dosing strategy on top of your chronic stuff, which is great for herbs, you really need to have them hit it hard. And so you're looking at, in the beginning, like every 2 hours dosing, tinctures, 60 drops at a time, or if you're doing, pills like EHB or BioVeg or something like that, you're doing them 3 to 4 times a day. So what we used to tell people back, like when, EHB is Echinacea, Hydrastis, and Berberis. There's BioVeg, and there's a million acute things. It doesn't really matter. But we would tell people we're going to have you go through like a bottle in 2 days in the acute phase and then back off. Now, if they were hardy and they would do one of the tinctures that I'm about to show you, we would tell them, in the first 2 days, you're going to do real high doses, then we're going to back off to lower doses. The reason for that is you get some traction immunologically with patients so that you get enough herbs in them. If people, because we have patients come in all the time, they're like, I took, fill in the blank herb, it's supposed to be good for infections, but I didn't get better. And you ask how much they took, and they took, like one pill once or twice a day. Well, it's, they're not, it doesn't work like that with herbs. So remember marinating people when they flare up acutely, or if you're going to hit somebody just acutely. We talked about this last time, but just to bring it up again, the hemp formula, Hydrastis, Echinacea, Myrrh, Phytolacca, and you could switch out Oregon grape for the Hydrastis if you want to do that. And so in the beginning, 60 drops every 2 hours for 2 days, and then every 4 to 6 hours. Now it's every 2 hours of waking time. They're not waking up to take it. And it literally is equal parts. And if you want the backstory on that, you can go to the previous webinar and listen to that. I did mention the other one, and this is a great one with your chronic or your acute patients where their throat just blows up because, again, either the grandkids are coughing on them, or there's somebody at the office giving them something that's already immune compromised. You're using Baptisia, peppermint, berberis, phytolacca, and most of the time that's where I would stop. And so I would make this, and what I would do is have them put a half teaspoon in a couple ounces of water and gargle and swallow. Idea being it's very anodyne. It actually takes the pain down. We use this a lot with acute mono, where the throat is just so painful, and it would take the pain down while it was doing some work on the infections as well. The other option you could do, and I went into this a little bit deeper in the November webinar, but you can make this up, and I used to make this up in a 6-ounce, 6-ounce tincture bottle, and I would just put those herbs in. There'd be a lot of headroom in there, basically, and it had a label already on it. And so when the person came in, then I would QS it up with distilled water, so filled it up to 6 ounces with distilled water, and then I would just say decant, 1 ounce at a time, gargle and swallow every couple of hours, and it worked really, really well in that respect. Phytolacca on its own is amazing. There's a lot of I think this is October webinar. November webinar, the last one. I don't know which one I'm talking about now. Anyway, the last one on the low dose herbs. There's a lot of info about phytolacca, so I won't repeat it here. Now, some nasty infections, and do we know anything about them? C. diff. So, first thing about Clostridial species is Clostridium difficile is the famous one. There are many, 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 many types of Clostridia. Your gut is home to many Clostridia, and so you can have no or very little C. diff, but have a lot of microbiome disruption, organic acid disruption, also stuff because of the other Clostridia. And the reason that we, until recently, didn't test for them was Clostridium difficile can make you sick or kill you, so that's what we focused on. But you want to keep in mind that the other Clostridia are hugely at play in all of your, overgrowth syndromes and your chronic organic acid manipulation problems and dysbiotic shit that's going on and all that other stuff. The other Clostridia are there. So this paper, though, I put in because it's a really good article about fecal transplant, conventional treatments. So what are the drugs that work and don't work for Clostridia? How do you do it? It talks about high purity coconut oil treatments, all kind of other stuff. And you get free full text online. And it's like if you have people where you're either looking at a lot of other Clostridial species, and maybe you're not going to fecal transplant for the other Clostridial species, or you're supporting fecal transplants, or you're just doing a whole bunch of work with this very difficult to kill bug, this is the paper I would keep with you and kind of refer back to, because they did a really nice job with this. This is a real good paper. Now, mycoplasma, a lot of people, we think of, which reasonably so, we're thinking of, we have to use, doxycycline and all this, and often we do. But Bonlongen decocted, which is one of the radix species. Remember, I mentioned them earlier. So radix has been studied a lot for influenza, other viruses. Well, it turns out it's antimycoplasmal as well. And so that's one you can do, especially if you're used to using Chinese formulas. You can kind of kick up the radix species in those. If not, there's others to consider. Astragalus actually works pretty good. One of the things with astragalus to consider is nowadays I like the AHCC extract, like Empower, one of those. But astragalus will get to things in an acute manner that other things have a hard time with. So mycoplasma, the weird viruses like Coxsackie virus and other stuff like that, astragalus actually has some effect there. Now, this is one I made a little footnote here. Astragalus, we used to think only ethanol extracts would work. It turns out that astragalus can work from a number of different points of view. It's more about in a it's more about knowing your provider, I guess, is what I want to say. Golden seal actually has some effect. Elder actually has some effect. Elder comes up in one of those previous paper. Oregano, thyme. And then the other thing to consider with mycoplasma is there's also the biofilm component with any of these chronic things. So you got to be in after that. And it usually takes a rotation. So whether it's mycoplasma or a chlamydia strain or a Borrelia or any of those nasties, you got to rotate. So often I'll do a couple of these at a time and move through. I think it's a question go flashing across. Yeah, so Nicole brings up a good point. Dr. Buhner talks about replacing all the nutrients that mycoplasma scavenge, including complexes of DNA and RNA and stuff. And here's the thing. From a macro point of view, Nicole, this is what I see. Yes. This is why I'm all so big about repairing the mitochondria and the cells during, but especially after you're done hitting the person with all of this stuff to kill the bugs. I think what really happens, and it could be direct for myco, but you could say the same thing if you read that research I presented about the virus and the changes to the mitochondria. Same thing for a lot of viruses and stuff too. So it's really it's not really about mycoplasma being special. It is very viral-like, and it does really screw up a lot of your, nuclear and mitochondrial material. But you do have to replace nutrients as you go along. I have never done kind of like Buhner talks about and replace them all as I go, because the person is only so much you can put into the person. But this is also why I like the idea of cycling things, so that when we get them a bit stable, meaning we've probably done 12 or 2 9-week or the 12 and a 9-week or whatever of anti-infective stuff, we're going to take some time, maybe put them on, like my favorite, it'd be some mushrooms in the background, and the rest of their pill count is going to go towards nutrient repletion and all this other stuff. And depending on how healthy they are, you may not need all of the stuff on that list. So like the DNA and RNA complexes, this is before Buhner, we would talk about this long ago, and using these RNA extracts, and there's probably some DNA in there as well, and we would use that with our chronic infection, chronic fatigue patients and stuff like that. And they'd be taking like 20 pills a day of these things. It would actually help. And I think part of the reason is that at that time, so we're going back 25 years here, at that time the knowledge about these different infections and the way to deal with them was kind of low. And also we didn't actually know as much about how to help the mitochondria recover and all that. So I think the concept is really good, but what I see is patients can only get so much in them. So if I'm really focusing on knocking out as much of the low-hanging infectious fruit as possible, I'm going to just keep going after with, either natural medicines or drugs and natural medicines or whatever, and I'm going to have them on some sort of low-level repletion. And then when I get to a break period where I'm using low-level anti-infective stuff, so maybe, like I say, some mushrooms and some wormwood in the background or something, then I'm going to do more of that stuff. The way I would say it is I go back to the list that I have that help the mitochondria, which is a little bit shorter, and I have not, except in the most extreme cases of fatigue, found the need to do like the complexes, the RNA and DNA, like we used to do all those years ago. So I hope that that's helpful. Yeah. I mean, these people don't feel good, so they need as much put back in them as possible, but like you gotta, you got to deal with what they can actually do and take and all too. And sometimes the other thing, just this is just part of clinical management, which you already know, but I will just, if the person looks at you with those eyes, it's like, I am not going to take one more pill. Like when they get to that point, even if they don't say it out loud, I will often say, look, this is a journey. It's not a destination, and we need to give you a break. We're working on all this other stuff. We can kind of go to maintenance on some of the things. We don't want to take all the immune support away, but we can do some things that are kind of cover a lot of bases. Usually when I bring in like the HCC or something like that. So we're going to bring your pill count way down. We're going to give you some goodies to help your mitochondria, and we're just going to chill here. And I'm going to meet with you, every whatever you think. But I'm going to do this for 8 or 9 weeks. Meet with you every 4 weeks, and just kind of keep them in the game. Otherwise, they just stop, and it's like screw it. And as a person who has dealt with this myself personally, I get it. I mean, I have stopped, everything, and I know that that's not the way to getting back to health. But I also know I get overwhelmed, and so a lot of it is sort of modulating to. You don't have to stop everything to still move forward. That's a really important thing. And people, whether it's Dr. Buhner or me or any of people that's we're all supposed to know something or whatever. We all have these long lists of things. It doesn't mean you have to do all of them. It means these are things we've discovered over time, and so we're just doing the best we can. And a lot of that, just I'll say, comes from we all probably existed in a time when nobody knew very much about it. We had to learn it all the hard way, and so making lists helps you, I guess. So yeah. All right. This is another one. Excuse me. And it's talking about some more extracts and mycoplasma, so you can look this baby up too. But I think the important part about is there are things that we think are so hard to treat, and they're hard to treat. But if you don't want to have drugs available, or the person, how many of us have seen it where someone comes in and they've been rotating doxycycline for 5 years. It's like, if doxycycline was going to be the total answer to whatever bug they have, it would be dead by now, right? So it doesn't mean doxy is good or bad. It just means that the plant medicines really give us a lot more options. And I often, even in the worst cases where I need drugs, I will use plant medicines right along with them. But if I couldn't use drugs, there's a lot of stuff that you can do and you can rotate. It's just an interesting paper that had some good conclusions. Aspergillus, this is a horrible thing. And this is an actual outline that I wrote for somebody who asked me a question. So it's not terribly well edited. It was done to help somebody quickly. But Aspergillus is there's sort of two ways to think about it. One is from the point of view of people die from Aspergillus. Like, this is a horrible, horrible infection, kind of like C. diff. But more people live with it and are chronically ill than die from it. So, for example, Aspergillus went metastatic in the body of my friend Walter Crinian, and that's actually what killed him. Now, what really killed him long term was what allowed the Aspergillus in and allowed it to become metastatic. So it wasn't just our friend here, Aspergillus, but that's how bad of an infection Aspergillus can be. But what happens more commonly, kind of like I said with the Clostridia species, there's a lot of them that aren't famous, but that hang out. They shift your microbiome, and Aspergillus is really, in other fungus too, but Aspergillus is horrible at switching your cell-mediated immunity around. So if you have Aspergillus that get high enough level, it can actually burn out your CMI, and it can make you immunocompromised. So aspergillus is no joke. The other thing is aspergillus is at the back of a lot of chronic pain and a lot of other stuff as a dysbiotic organism. So things to consider are, how is it so potent? And the first few bullet points talk about how the aspergillus doesn't stop growing. It likes to just keep moving forward. It blocks neutrophils. It does. It's just like it's a really good killing machine, and it doesn't get slowed down by our normal things. And so, again, our Chinese herbs can be very helpful here. There's a mixture down here using Folium and Radix and some other stuff. Kind of, you've heard these before from me. Kind of same thing, and there's actually a paper where they looked at it. Quercetin, luteolin, curcumin have also been looked at, and we've seen quercetin before with the herpes viruses. Curcumin we'll see a little bit later. Boswellia is another one, and we think of Boswellia for brain inflammation and stuff, but like Boswellia, quercetin, and curcumin, which we use a lot for immune switching for inflammation. Actually, some of these weirder bugs are made more sensitized, and we can buy these things. The other thing is, if you have a respiratory thing, you can nebulize. We have a whole webinar on nebulizing, but you can do EDTA as a biofilm breaker in the nebulizer, and all of the other stuff as well. So these are some clinical ideas. If you have aspergillus or its signs show up, say on an oat test, on a gut test, or whatever, some things to do. If it's respiratory primarily, some nebulized things to do. Hyperbaric action can be very helpful, and you really want to follow these people's CBC and DIF and their IgA and E levels, because they'll go up and down. And what we don't want is for the aspergillus to become so persistent that it starts to burn out first the CMI and then in the humoral immunity or antibody immunity. And these are some of the articles that all that came from. Now, this one's been in the news a lot, I think, just because, it's a deadly bug, but I think because of social media, it's been in the news. So, Candida auris, this is that bad drug-resistant one that has killed some people. So, the first thing about this is it does stuff that Candida albicans and some of the other Candidas don't do. But the first thing that it does, because we try and kill it with antifungal drugs, is it creates a biofilm that protects it and traps the antifungal drugs. This is horrible. So triazoles like itraconazole, ketoconazole, fluconazole, all those ones that we use on all this stuff, it gets trapped in there. So, and then it brings other bugs with it, with multi-drug resistant capability. So one of the problems with Candida auris as a resistant bug is you're fighting its drug resistance, but you're also fighting the friends that it brings along. And so you have to hit it from multiple ways. It does have some susceptibility to nonspecific things like your salivary histatin and your neutrophils. So there is some. That's the reason we don't all have it. And it's on the converse end of the spectrum. It's resistant to reactive oxygen species, and so normally a lot of our white cell and our first line stuff is reactive oxygen mediated. So it doesn't really react very well to that. It's not bothered by that. If it goes systemic, it can be fatal. So it's one of these things that requires both biofilm phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So take a look at that. The other thing is, this is where I was talking about, they've looked at NSAIDs as being a way to get the triazole drugs to work in some of these species, and it actually does work. So you could you could use something like Motrin they used in the one study, or here's just the tie-in I would make looking at that one paper from Nature and the tree medicines. Quercus, so willow bark, also does exactly the same thing, and it's as you know, it has a similar mechanism to NSAID, so you could do that as well. The other thing that's interesting about this resistant candida that can be deadly is it has a lot of the resistance factors that cancer has. And so sometimes looking at it from a more macro point of view, this would be a time where you want to attack the micro drug-resistant parts, but you want to back up and also kind of look at the immunome as you go through. Now, lactoferrin has been suggested. This is something that we sometimes give people orally. Usually lactoferrin, physiologically is a sequestrant for iron in your body, but lactoferrin as a supplement can be used as a synergist. It's not well studied, but it's suggestively studied. Autophagy, so fasting, intermittent fasting works very well. Radish juice, actually, yes, really radish juice. So I'm not talking about radish species. I mean, like, go get some organic radishes of all kinds and juice them, and it can actually create apoptosis. Chelators along the lines of the biofilm breaking ones, as we talked about, and you can go look at that webinar if you want to. Copper sulfate will kill it in vitro, but probably not in vivo because you couldn't get enough in somebody without harming the patient. Ultraviolet light kills it on fomites, but we don't know about inside of people. But if you really had a bad case and you had the ability to do UVBI or UV laser or something like that, I would do it. And so there you go. There's some references. And again, I just reminding you, ibuprofen potentiates the antifungal activity of fluconazole. And again, I would say ibuprofen can do it, but white willow can also do it. Okay, quickly, some individual agents, and as we go through here. I always like to just throw back in that like cheap stuff still works in the background. And some herbs can be quite expensive, but herbs generally can be manageable financially for people. So if you're trying to prioritize with people, a lot of it depends on if you truly have one of these complex chronic cases where they've got some viruses, some fungus, some bacteria, some parasites, everything, you're not going to kill them all at once anyway, whether you're using drugs or natural stuff. So one of the ways to help people prioritize is to just let them know that this is a macro problem, and we need to work from the top down. So we're not going to go after everybody all at once, but we're going to try and put in some things that are cost effective, that have activity against multiple types of the bugs in the kingdom, and we'll go after the more symptomatic ones first. So what that might mean is something, super, well, not super specific, but more specific. So let's say we've got a lot of gut-oriented nastiness going on, and we want to use some wormwood, Artemisia family stuff, and we want to use some broader, some oregano or something like that. And we're going to put these into the person with whatever synergist. Then we want to think about how much background help can we get for the most, bang for our buck. Well, and I'll let you read these. So I'm not going to read you all about vitamin C, but it's human nature to forget the simple things sometimes. Kind of like and I'm speaking just from my own experience, not anyone else's. It's easy to go on autopilot and forget to ask people about their diet. Are you on a high sugar diet that's not going to help your immune system? Are you just so depressed all of the time that you're eating or drinking things that are, this is not going to help you? You got to get real with people that are chronically ill. And then, that's such an impediment to cure. We often blow by it because when we first talked to them, their diet sounded really good. And now it's not, but we don't ask. Well, vitamin C is kind of that way too. It's like it's cheap. It does so many things for us. And think of it this way, kind of, a little bit to Nicole's point, vitamin C is one of those things that if you're healthy, you don't need a terribly large amount, even though humans don't make it. We don't need a terribly large amount to stay healthy and going on. I mean, in the modern toxic world, a little more than, our grandparents did. But if you're sick, you are burning up your vitamin C like crazy. So not only do you not have background amounts that you're burning up, but now you don't have all the stability that vitamin C provides for you. I like to show this particular paper just because this is the 2010 paper about treating the common cold. And the first thing that they did is looked at, dose, and they excluded below 200 milligrams a day of vitamin C, which is, well, they should have probably put that baby up a little higher, but okay, that's what they did. But they looked at lots and lots and lots of them as far as, colds and stuff. And so they looked at like 10,000 episodes of prophylactic vitamin C and duration of colds. And what's interesting is they say duration of colds reduced by 8% on average in children, in adults, and 13% by children. Severity was reduced in the prophylaxis trials, okay? But then they come up and they say, but it doesn't, really work. Now, this didn't really have to do with statistical significance. It had to do more with interpretation. So failure of vitamin C supplementation to reduce the incidence of colds means that prophylaxis is not justified. Well, you're asking and answering two different questions. So duration and severity were lower. Incidence was not really effective. So here's the thing, and this again is looking at a model of, rhinoviruses and stuff like that. But here's the bottom line. Yeah, vitamin C may not, at these lower doses, is probably going to prevent a whole bunch of stuff from happening, but it's cheap. It's burned up like crazy in people who are ill, especially the chronically ill, and it does decrease the duration and severity of acute viruses. So why not employ it? Unless there's some reason that the person shouldn't have it, which I can't think of at this moment, but why not employ it? And there's a whole bunch of stuff about how the immune system works with with vitamin C. This goes way back to 1981. This is not me, the Anderson. This is the other Anderson. There's only two of us in the whole world. And there's a bunch of stuff about how it works. And so I'm just going to go through those quickly. But I just want to really just reframe us to, if your patient comes in and says, I can afford, the tincture you're going to make me, and something really inexpensive. Ascorbic acid is pretty damn inexpensive, and it can be quite helpful. And the person is burning through it. So it's just a little check in there. Also, low dose vitamin C natural killer cell activity. So NK cells, it's not so much how many you have, it's how active they are. And this is oral. This is not an IV study. So oral levels of vitamin C can improve natural killer cell activity, and that is super important. And this is levels that anybody could take. Whole bunch of other things, looking at shingles and other stuff like that. What about other things? Now, this section here, I'm going to go through, I think, quickly. I know I say that sometimes, and then I get triggered by something and I talk about it for a while. But in this particular study, and then there's going to be some other studies that look at combinations and food and supplement use. So the interesting thing about this study in 2011 was the observational study is the first one to show that intake of vitamin C from food was sufficient to lower risk of URTIs. That's pretty amazing because normally the food amount of vitamin C that you get is pretty low, but you can look at high vitamin C foods. That's one thing. The other thing is that supplemental use of vitamin E and C together reduce the risk of upper respiratory tract infections among men. that had lower vitamin C from food. But remember that vitamin E and vitamin C recycle each other, so this would kind of make some sense. Like they do work together. And this is a look at zinc and vitamin C together in the common cold. Vitamin C plus zinc was more effective than placebo at reducing troubles over 5 days of treatment. And you'll see this. So vitamin C and zinc have a very synergistic activity. It's unlike vitamin C and copper, they don't chemically interact in a negative way, and they actually have some positive synergy. So I'll just throw that out there. Vitamins and mast cells, C and E, talking about allergic disease and inflammation. Remember that C and E together helped with upper respiratory tract problems. Well, it turns out that part of what they're doing is settling down the immunome. This is looking at vitamin D and C. And then another one. This is actually taking a look at a number of nutrients, and if there is deficiency, do we have more problems going on? And if you go through the results here, which I will not read to you because you would all log off immediately, but basically what they're looking at here is if you have nutrient sufficiency in a person, are less likely to get sick. And this is like, well, we could have probably told you that. This is one of those studies that just looked at it mechanistically and said, yeah, that's actually true. Let's see. Any thoughts about plain ascorbate versus buffered versus liposomal? Wondering if liposomal has same impact since it might not hang out in the extracellular space. Yeah, here. So I'll try and do this quickly in 2 phases. Most of what I have observed over time, as far as benefits around viruses and immune and whatever, has been plain oral ascorbic acid divided throughout the day, kind of ramping up to their bowel tolerance. Just a minute. So, and it works quite well, and that's what most of the studies are really done with. Now, what I always tell patients is, and this doesn't get to liposomal yet, but I would always tell people, look, unless you have digestive system burning intolerance, I don't mean it gives you loose stools. Everybody gets it at some dose with vitamin C. But if you take ascorbic acid and your stomach burns, you are somebody who is probably sensitive, and so I would give them buffered C. And what I would tell them is, if you don't get the burning, use the cheap ascorbic acid because it's going to go in, absorb very well, your body's going to use it just fine. We don't want you burning your stomach, so if it burns, get some buffered C. Okay. And here's the thing to remember just before we get to liposomal. When you are sick or when you are getting sick, your GI cells, and I don't have the papers to show this, but they do exist. You can go look it up. Your GI cells upregulate the GLUT transporters and the HSVCT transporters, both of the ways in to the bloodstream for vitamin C. When you're sick, your gut cells upregulate those so that you go from maximum absorption of 200 to 500, 700 milligrams of vitamin C a day to you can absorb 20 grams of vitamin C a day because of that. So first thing is you tell them, well, your bowel tolerance will change, and as you get better, it gets lower. That's a good sign. So I would do ascorbic acid on almost everybody, and then buffered if they had tummy troubles with it that were not loose stools but burning. So that's the first thing. Then comes liposomal vitamin C. I've used not a ton, but a fair amount of liposomal vitamin C in cancer patients and other people, and the wrap is, it's going to go in, and the liposome will get it through the gut, which is possible. But remember that what the liposome is going to generally do is get it into the gut cell, and instead of having if the liposome and the vitamin C do not dissociate in the gut cell, what happens is that instead of going in through an HSV-CT or a GLUT transporter and going into the plasma, that vitamin C in the liposomal envelope is not going to go through that route. It's going to go into the lacteals, and then it's going to go into the lymph, and it's going to miss first pass in the liver, and it's going to be dumped out into the venous blood, and it's going to circulate around that way. Now, the theory goes, if you do that, you're missing first pass, and then the liposome, if it's still there, is going to help the vitamin C to get into the cell, which theoretically could work and all that. And that's, when they came out with the first liposomal vitamin C in the, I don't know, early 90s or late 80s or whatever. Well, that's kind of the story that we were all told. I'm not convinced that so since those days, I've talked to a lot of people who build liposomes. I have done research with liposomes that were supposedly good and they weren't, and all sort of stuff. What I can tell you is it's super hard to make a liposome that will actually do what I just told you. So let's for the moment say liposomes are going to get it and it's going to deliver it to be inside the cell. Then I would prefer what we always did previously, which is plain ascorbate or buffered ascorbate, to just raise the plasma level and don't worry so much about the cell. I can make a case if the liposome really worked that missing first pass and the liposome delivering it to the cell might be good in some kind of viruses and stuff. But in cancer, it actually doesn't do anything because you want the extracellular ascorbate to be high. You don't really want the cell ascorbate to be high, and that's a whole other discussion. So I really tried to rein my brain in because this is like an 8-hour discussion that we could have about the chemistry of vitamin C, and I apologize if I got a little triggered there. But for most of what we're talking about here, ascorbic acid or buffered ascorbate is really going to do what we need it to do, and we really won't need the liposomal stuff. Because here's the other nice thing with nature and your body. So let's take cancer out of it because we're not talking about that tonight. If you're getting sick, your body, those transporters are going to upregulate like crazy, and you can literally go from bowel tolerance of 500 milligrams to 2,000 milligrams to 20 grams before you hit bowel tolerance. It's that different when you're sick. So your body actually upregulates the plasma uptake quickly. And as you get better, your bowel tolerance starts to drop. So I'll just tell people, if you start, having loose stools, just start backing off on your dose. It's your body telling you it's got plenty of vitamin C. Well, Jason, thank you. And that either means that I really made a lot of sense, or you and I have some sort of mental problem. I think I hope I made sense to you. So Jill asks, is there a best way to pre- and post-test C status so we can test our method? Actually, no. It's a pointless test for the most part. And here's why I say that. There's a lot of research using test methodologies to test vitamin C and all that. But in the case of infectious immunologic use of oral vitamin C, so not talking about IV, but oral vitamin C, bowel tolerance is the perfect feedback mechanism by which your body either sucks more vitamin C into the plasma or shuts the receptors down so it can't suck it in the plasma. And so actually what the old-timers told us, which was to go up and down bowel tolerance, gives you an actual physiologic read. So the plasma levels that you might be able to test are, number one, the tests are shit and they're really not worth using outside of research. And number two, they're not going to make that much difference. So actually bowel tolerance makes more difference. All right. Well, you only got me off. We just have a few more things to talk about. Exactly, Jill. That is, we should embroider that on something. Okay. And of course, vitamin A is important. You can read through these, but it turns out vitamins and minerals are important. That's the point there. I just want to I'm going to, well, you guys know how it is. I'm going to try and not get triggered here and go into echinacea too much, but echinacea has been batted back and forth over the last, 30 years that I've been playing with it. It's good, it's bad, it does stuff, it doesn't do stuff, and all this stuff. And so there's this one paper that came out in JAMA from the Bastyr Clinical Research Site, and this is before I was there, 2003, is when they published this. And they published this paper, and it said, well, echinacea as dosed in the study was not effective in treating upper respiratory symptoms in patients 2 to 11 years old. Its use is associated with an increased risk of rash. Well, this got the attention of a lot of people, but here's the thing that happened. So many of these people, by the way, are people that I worked with later in the cancer research, and so I know most or all of these folks. But when this came out, there were two things I just want to say parenthetically. One is the reason this paper got published in JAMA is because it was a groundbreaking negative paper about echinacea in children. That is the reason that they published it. The actual intervention was not well thought out if you wanted to show efficacy of echinacea. So if you look down below, there's links to comments on echinacea for treating colds in children. And those comments came from two different places. The first was a group that I was working with at the time. So we published that in 2004, and that was the first time I got published in JAMA. So that's actually the Anderson P there. That's actually me, and Deborah Brammer, and Linda Kim, and Deb Wallner, and I all got together and read the paper 18 times and all this stuff. And we had a pretty robust comeback to it. But then also there was another comment that came from these two people that's also quite good. And basically the problem is the study design wasn't great, the dosing, but also the type of echinacea was not appropriate. And so it's like if you're setting up an intervention to fail, that's what they did. Now, I don't believe they tried to do that. It's just what they did. But anyway, these come up a lot, and I just like to show the two sides of the coin of that one. So there's that one. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Here's the bottom line. In complex with other things, such as all the other stuff that's supposed to help you, the recyclers of glutathione like vitamin C, zinc, selenium, all those other things. Echinacea is a good additional thing on the acute end of the spectrum, unless someone is actually allergic to it or something like that, especially where the gravity is respiratory. Think about that. Again, looking at echinacea, zinc, vitamin C, all that stuff. So. Also remember that probiotics are really, really helpful in both prevention and maintenance during the process. So if you go back to others like 2 or 3 months ago when we talked about the antibiotic or the drug anti-infectives, what I said during that, I'll say it again because it's kind of the same for natural stuff, is at night, if at all possible, while you're giving all these anti-infectives, you want the person to go to bed taking a probiotic and a demulcent at the very least so that you keep the GI tract going. You can all do some repair stuff like probiotic demulcent and some glutamine or some carnosine or something like that. So you always want that going through. And one of the things that happens is sometimes people will think, well, okay, there's antibiotics going on. They'll wait till the end of antibiotics and then give people probiotics. Well, you need to do that, but it's too far out of the gate there. The other problem is if you inherit the patient from a doctor that didn't realize probiotics were important, and they've been treating them for 3 months to 3 years with antibiotics, you got a huge gut repair to replace. But the other thing that we know now about probiotics is that they trade genetic material with your gut and with your own gut bugs and stuff. So they do all this good stuff for your immune system. So just a quick here plug for the probiotics. If your patient comes to you and they've been wrecked, get them fixed up and doing it. If you're looking at prevention or you've got that person who you're treating for chronic long-term stuff, make sure that they're staying current with keeping their probiotics up. Sometimes it's at slow pitch as prebiotic foods. Most of the time during active treatment, I'm trying to get people to eat prebiotic foods, but I'm also trying to get them to do the nighttime dose of a probiotic demulcent or whatever you can get them at night. Now, most of these you're probably going to have heard of, and so I'm not going to stick around on these a long time. But just some reminders: respiratory complaints. And looking at, so it says 12 tablets a day of a proprietary Chinese blend. These are the smaller tablets, so it wasn't really that, that horrendous of a thing. But it basically did help quite a bit, and so it had andrographis and eleuthero put together. So again, the stuff that we've heard about most of our clinical lives or all our clinical lives, if it keeps coming up and you keep seeing, you see newer and older studies kind of both saying, yeah, these still work, et cetera, they probably do. And so this is kind of preaching to the choir here. Now, this one I was a little surprised about in 2012, and it was looking at RSV and a kind of cimicifuga, which I don't normally think of for RSV, but it actually was studied and was helpful. So something you might want to think of, especially if you're branching out or you're looking for other, genus and species to work on. Cimicifuga actually has some antiviral help, and again, this is a horrible virus, especially little babies. Also, just keep in mind that curcumin, although it does everything else in the world, also helps in mouse models, but I've seen this in people models too, with airway inflammation. And one of the problems that you get with people, like you get a chronic patient that already run down and they flare up this time of year, they will cough and they'll have wheezing. You might have killed the bugs, but it's like you can't get the inflammation under control. A lot of it is, and this of course doesn't show you the whole paper, but a lot of it is a COPD-like, so driven like COPD inflammation in the airways that can keep the cough going for a month or two afterwards. There are years where we have these sort of things. Well, the person already is fighting myco and other atypical lung bugs. They need all the help they can get. Prior, and I don't know if this comes up later or not, but in days gone by, we would give people high doses of gingerols, and that would be helpful. But what we found is that curcumin and ginger together actually have a better lung gravity or affinity. I think you're probably pretty good with the berberis family. I just want to mention that berberis is one of those things that has antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial effect, which is another reason why the berberines are so good. Just a quick interlude. If you are banging your head against the wall and your patient is, and they think that you're an idiot, always back up and consider other things. So heavy metals and toxins are one that can keep infections going. Biofilms, definitely. Underlying allergy, especially in the upper respiratory system, really the whole body, but upper respiratory system where you get the fungal infection allergy cycle that starts going. That's one thing that can happen in the lungs as well. So just step back and maybe check their IgEs for stuff, etc. Occult infections, and by this I mostly mean you haven't checked other infections, and then immune suppression. And one of the things beyond biologic drugs and steroids and HIV, keep in mind that long-term chronic systemic fungal infections like aspergillus and some of those are immune suppressive. Very important to keep in mind. So these are some things about metals and resistance Now, I went through these in the respiratory webinar, so I'm going to just blow through these really quick. I just want you to kind of keep in mind, if you have a chronic person where it's mostly respiratory, there's a lot of respiratory stuff you can do, but what happens a lot is your chronic, what I call your chronic yuck patient. So they have some Borrelia and Babesia, and maybe they got chlamydia pneumonia, and they've got EBV and whatever. You're dealing with all those things. When they flare, they will often flare due to respiratory, either respiratory exposure or respiratory fulmination. And so it's just a good thing to remember that, the respiratory system, there's a lot that you can do there. A lot of good stuff around garlic, just good to remember. And when thinking about food that you can introduce to people, and yes, it's not terribly socially great to smell like garlic that is raw or almost raw, but it really, really does work well. Remember that, start with food, work your way out. But another thing I just want to point out with this particular paper, and there's others like it, is that amphotericin B is a wonderful antifungal drug. It's a little hard on the liver if you give it IV, but it's a really great drug. But there is synergy with allicin and antifungal drugs. And so they list some other ones, like selinomycin, which you cannot get in this country, monoensin, which you cannot get in this country, and selinomycin is actually a structural relative of ivermectin, which you can get in this country. But the bottom line is that if you're looking and you've really got a resistant fungal thing going on, in addition to either Quercus alba or an NSAID to help with the resistance, remember garlic is super, super useful as well. And then the other thing, which I blew by really quick because I said it in so many other things, but remember when fungus become resistant, the other thing, especially in the GI tract, is they suck up heavy metals. And so we will often give people oral DMSA, not to chelate them, but to chelate the metals out of the fungus, and then we actually break some of the resistance there as well. So all sorts of stuff there. So, you're looking at large microgram doses. Now, there are some products that, have maybe a little bit lower dosing strategies, and that this is a summary of allicin content from the published studies, not from specific, like super high potency type of allicin, products, but you'll find that they're not too far off. Artemisia, talked a lot about it, but basically kind of like berberines, it kills across the board. We think of it a lot for parasites and worms and stuff, but and of course tuberculosis as I cough, but it actually the wormwood family targets fungus and all sorts of other bad things too. Excuse me just a moment. Now this is one that I do use if I want it to go systemic. It's a liposomal artemisinin. It works very well. Tastes just heinously bad because you taste, it's sort of like your tongue absorbs the liposomes, and the liposomes hold artemisinin, which is incredibly bitter. So if you want a lot of systemic effect, this works pretty well. If you want general effect, the dry artemisinin works fine in the gut. If you want to mix, you can use a mixture. There's allergy research how wormwood oil and artemisinin together. Oregano is still my favorite to start with because it covers so many, like it kills almost everything. Mexican oregano is the one that you really want, so the Gaia or the ADP or one of those works really well. And just keep in mind, immune globulins take a beating. So if you don't have a true immune globulin deficiency, you can need to stimulate them. So things that will do that are colostrum and colostrum-like products. Saccharomyces boulardii can do it if they tolerate that. Most mushrooms actually stimulate immune globulins, and the thymus extract does as well. And thymus is something that we used to use a whole lot of as an extract, and it sort of has waxed and waned over time. But it's, you know, if you need something to cycle in and you're doing mushrooms and all that, then thymus is one of those things that you can consider. Thymus, if you look at the data on thymus extracts, and this is all from Europe, we're not going to study it here in America, but looking at both immune deficiencies but also in cancer and other stuff, thymus is pretty amazing peptide to use. Now, for acute flares, remember hydrotherapy, the eclectic formulas, food sources like raw garlic and all the other goodies that we do with people, and then all of your kind of acute-oriented EHB, BioVeg, Super BioVeg, whatever you like. I do like that AHEC in the Empower on acutes as well. And again, I'll use, depending on the size of the person, 1 to 4 twice a day with them. No financial affiliation with this product at all, but I like it. And it's nice. It's made for acute, so H2-plex. So they originally did it for herpes simplex too, but really it works well for most yucky things. So it's got a lot of olive leaf and melissa and vitamin C and stuff. Why the lithium? That's because there were observational studies that people on lithium got less herpes outbreaks. So that's why that's in there. Selenium, so pretty good selenium dose. And then the vitamin A actually changed from a retinoid to a carotenoid, which I was not so happy with, but whatever. And then lysine. So it's a good one for acutes. Then again, this is one I'd tell people, you're going to take like 3 or 4 of these with each meal till the bottle's done. There's a whole biofilm webinar, and I can't say enough that the chronic infections, whether you're treating with drugs or natural stuff or combo, you can't do it without working on their biofilm. So please look into that. And that is very important. All right, we're still accredited by AANP, and the next one of these is next month on the 17th. By the way, we're paying to get the full 2 hours of farm credit for this one because it's gone over the course of 2 hours, and so there's that. We're continually updating the website. We're actually going to, in the next months, we're actually going to update the back end to make the user interfaces faster and better, because what you have with the website that you're listening to this on is a website that started with all of the board review stuff and a few blog posts and then a few a few classes, and now we have 1 billion things in there. So we're really kicking it up. The other thing that we're starting to outline and record are the masterclass series, which are going to start on their own website, because they're multi-part courses. So they're not like these. They're actual multi-part courses where you take a test and you'd be certified in business like that. So it's like a multi-part course in emergency medicine and laser photodynamic therapy and hyperbaric oxygen. So you're not all going to be interested in all those things, but if you want to take a series, you can do that. We've also keep expanding the free content. So friends and neighbors that don't want to spend any money on anything, have them go to the search bar and just look for free stuff. There's hundreds and hundreds of things in there for free now, as well as all of the board reviews and stuff of that nature. The books are still there. The book, first round of edits are done. It's I don't have the title for it yet, but it's about the mental and emotional process and dealing with it of getting a cancer diagnosis. We are going to taking AMP to Scottsdale again. Chronic GI illness is May 29th to 31st, and you can just look at AMP Scottsdale if you want to look at that. And there's your CE thing, 2 hours from AANP. And we keep them paid up so that they keep authorizing the CE. All right. Well, you've all lived through this. Are there any residual questions? Ba-ba-ba. All right. Well, everyone, yes, radish juice for the win. Always, always radish juice. That's one of those things I found as I was reading about, this deadly resistant candida, and it's like, oh, by the way, there's a constituent in radish juice. I was like, God, there you go. Who thinks of radish juice? So now you do. Difference between liposomal artemisia and powder. Okay, so Louise, here's the deal. Uh, Liposomal artemisinin, such as the product I showed you there, which is the best absorption one. I have no financial connection at all. I just use that's the one I use. Liposomal is if I want it to be systemic. So I've got somebody where I really need to make sure it makes its way to their lungs and to their wherever else the bugs are, etc. The powdered form, with most capsules are just powdered artemisinin. It doesn't absorb super well. It absorbs, but not super well. And so if I have a lot of gut problems, and artemisinins will kill almost all bad stuff in your gut, so it's great. I won't pay for the expensive liposomal artemisinin. I'll just get the powdered kind. In the middle, there's a product, and again, I have no financial connection to this, but Allergy Research has super artemisinin, and it's sort of half and half. It's got wormwood oil and powdered artemisinin together. And so if I have somebody where I want gut effect and I also want a bit of systemic effect, it's like between liposomal and the powdered forms. So bottom line is dry powder, good for gut, a little systemic absorption. Liposomal, big systemic absorption. Super artemisinin, where you've got a powder and oil together, it's about 50-50. Experience whole plant artemisia versus artemisinin. Yes. So here's the thing. I believe that in general, the reason that before liposomal artemisinin came out or was available, I almost exclusively used super artemisinin was because I think there's a benefit of whole plant artemisia and artemisinin together. Now that said, if you can't get it, use whatever you can get. If you want systemic effect, go with the lipo. If you're treating mostly gut stuff, you could plain artemisinin. And so that's kind of the way I look at it. And I'm hoping super artemisinin makes its way back because I do think that the whole plant makes a difference, and I like that they have it in there, Jill. Let's see, Louise, would you still cycle 1 week on and off because of liver? Yeah, so you bring up a good point, Louise. With artemisia products, you potentially have some liver stuff, but you also potentially have some anemia that can come with artemisia products. If it was an acute flare-up, I would probably go 2-3 weeks without cycling. I wouldn't have a problem. But Louise, on the average person where we're using, say, liposomal artemisinin or super artemisia, what I would generally do is you can do a week on, week off, but if it's for, kind of a nasty case, what I like to do is like 3 days on, 4 days off every week. And then and you do watch their liver enzymes and you watch their CBC, but it's more the CBC that I've seen be a problem. What about a pill form of lipo-art from a compounder? If you could get it, yeah, but the problem is artemisinins are on the list to be made illegal to compound. So the only way we're going to be able to get them is going to be as a supplement. So there you go. Chronic patients, Nicole asked, do you treat someone as acute with what might be considered a herx, like skin or joints or whatever? Yeah, super important. You see with chronic people, when you really get to a good layer or there's an acute and maybe you treat the acute and it actually affects the chronic problem, you'll see them herx or have some other type of reaction. What we normally think of there is a couple of things. One is you might be breaking biofilms open, you might be getting to a deeper level, or you may just be killing more stuff. So in those cases, you want to get them, if they can, get them sweating. You want to do some cyclic glutathione support or glutathione if they're herxing. And then the big thing that I have seen is you want to upregulate their adrenal support, because most, not today it's going to help, but over the course of treating the acute and getting the herxing or the herx-like effect, you want to upregulate their adrenal support, because most of the bad reactions come from their adrenals being beat down by the infection being stirred up. Joy, where is Hopkinson's located? Oh, Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Yeah, well, the problem is, and I'm assuming that they're a pharmacy and not a supplement company. Their raw material is going to go away probably. So let's hope that doesn't happen, but I'm not feeling super positive about the way things are going on that end right at the moment. Yeah, if it's a compounding farm. Now, here's the thing. Then I'll just really quickly, if a pharmacy has a registered supplement arm that is licensed differently, and it can make supplements, artemisinin is totally safe. The compounding part can't use it, but this is the weird part, the supplement part can. Here's the other thing. If they are a manufacturer, they're safe. So, for example, McGuff has a compounding and a manufacturing side. If they could manufacture something that's on the no list for the compounding side, the manufacturing side is exempt, just like supplements are. So if they have a supplement arm and they can make it as a supplement, then definitely. Doctor-inspired formulations. So I'm going to guess that's a supplement company, so they would be safe actually. The same as like Quicksilver or whoever else is making it. Yeah. So as long as there's a licensed registered supplement company and they're just selling it to you from that company, they're totally safe. They just don't want to touch it and open it up or something. Yeah. It's just crazy, but we don't want to get me talking about that this evening because it's not been a good week of good news for any of that stuff. All right, everyone. I hope this was helpful. If you spend the amount of time reading the papers in the first 30 slides that I gave you that I did, you'll have plenty to do for quite a while. And what I really want to just end on a high note, because the pharmacy business is not a high note. When the journal Nature starts publishing things about tree medicines that have been around forever and starts talking about how tree bark and all this other stuff has these properties that we knew it worked, but we never knew how it worked. And now we know how it works, and it's more amazing than any drug that we have. Plant medicines are very, very, very worthwhile. And as somebody that I know who is involved in planning for the government when everything goes to shit, told me one time, he said, when things really go bad, and he meant this in a nice way, he said, you people will be worth your weight in gold. And he laughed, and he said, by you people, I mean people who know about plants, because if things go to shit and we can't get drugs, you're going to be the only people that know how to do anything to help people out. So, which I thought thought was incredibly hilarious when he said it, because he told me that like 10 years ago, and it was much less of a reality than it is now. So keep keep being you people. All right. All right. Good night, everyone.